Hey, thanks for tuning in. This is going to be the third and final video on our overview of tissue types. We're going to cover today muscle tissue and nervous tissue, though not in as much detail as before, because these tissue types will be covered in much more detail when we do units specific to muscles and the nervous system. I hope you enjoy this, and I hope this has been a fun journey for you through these tissue types. All right, we'll start with muscle tissue. Muscles and muscle tissue contract to generate force, unlike other types of tissues that cannot generate force. These cells are generally elongated and called fibers. Now, I know it might be confusing since there were fibers in connective tissue, which were not cells, and now these are called fibers as well. For the meeting where all of the anatomists decided to call these two things the same thing, I don't know what happened, I missed that one, I'm sorry, but just try to keep straight that there are muscle fibers, which are cells, and that there are fibers in connective tissue, which are in the extracellular matrix, and not cells, but simple proteins. There are three main types of muscle tissue. There's skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. We'll go over first skeletal muscle. These are typically connected to bone, and typically you're able to control them consciously. There are exceptions. For instance, your abdominal muscles are not connected to bones directly, but connected to each other or connected to sheets of connective tissue called aponeuroses. Again, while these are typically controlled voluntarily, your diaphragm, your breathing muscles, and other reflexes can be overridden. So a reflex, like when you would kick your leg in response to a tap on the knee, or your breathing reflex when you are unconscious or not thinking about your breathing. Those are reflexes, though you can take over those muscles. When you look at the cells under a microscope, they have a few different things compared to a composite cell. They're long, they have striations or stripes, and they have multiple nuclei. The multiple nuclei are because many muscle cells, when they were maturing, fused together. That's one of their specialties, so that they could all work as one. The surface of muscle cells is called a sarcolemma. That used to be their plasma membrane, but it has a few modifications to allow it to respond to electric signals to contract. The striations are due to the proteins and their arrangement in them, and so their cytoskeleton also is rearranged to allow them to contract. And their smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulum is much different. It's been repurposed and it holds calcium ions. It's called a sarcoplasmic reticulum. In this case, it holds calcium ions until the muscle is ready to contract, in which case it would release the calcium ions. We'll cover those in detail when we get to muscle physiology, when we learn the muscular system. Next, I'm going to cover cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is only found in the heart. Cardiac, recall, means having to do with the heart. It is involuntary, which is a good thing. You don't need to think about your heartbeat. The cells also have striations, just like skeletal muscle, but the striations are fainter. The cells are a little bit more spread out. The cells are branching, and each cell has only one nucleus. The way that they're able to communicate with each other, though, very quickly and in unison, is that they're connected by things called intercalated discs that let substances flow through them so that they can communicate. The cells can easily communicate and contract in unison. So you can see these darker lines are the intercalated discs. Each cell has only one nucleus, and the cells are branched. Smooth muscle gets its name because it's the one of the three that does not have striations, and it looks smooth under a microscope. The cells are also not as long as the other muscle cells. They are spindle-shaped, which means elongated. Where you can find smooth muscle is lining internal organs that need to contract, or lining the digestive tract that helps move food through the digestive tract, through the esophagus, the stomach, and the intestines. It's also found in the walls of blood vessels, where it would allow blood vessels to contract or dilate. Certain blood vessels, depending on what your body needs, would need to have more blood going through them, in which case they would relax and dilate, or they would need less blood going through them, and so they would constrict using the smooth muscle. On a microscope slide, smooth muscle can be difficult to identify if it's out of context, if you don't know what it is that you're looking at, what thing that you're looking at under the microscope, because it could look kind of like dense connective tissue, it could look kind of like fibrocartilage. Depending on what stain is used, you might not be able to just tell looking at a picture. You might need to know what slide it is, like if it's part of an intestine or if it's part of a stomach and you're able to look around to know if it's smooth muscle or simple squamous epithelium or dense connective or fibrocartilage. And last for today, we're going to cover nervous tissue. There's not a lot here, and it isn't because nervous tissue is the simplest type of tissue, it's because we'll cover it in much more detail when we do a unit on the nervous system. Nervous tissue is found in the brain and spinal cord and the peripheral nerves. The brain and spinal cord are called the central nervous system. The peripheral nerves connect to it, connect to the vertebrae, and those would be like the nerves that go out to the tips of your fingers to control them or take sensations in, that go to the tips of your toes or all of your muscles to control them. When you tap your elbow and it's your funny bone, that's actually a nerve, a peripheral nerve that you're hitting and causing a sensation to go through it. The types of cells in nervous tissue are either neurons, which are the things that send or receive electric signals, or neuroglia, which is a general category of all of the rest of the cells that would appear in nervous tissue. The neurons will receive electric signals from other neurons. They might send out electric signals, or they might process them, decide if they're going to pass on an electric signal or not. They have three general parts, though they might have different shapes. They have a cell body that has their nucleus and general cell machinery, mitochondria, smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, centrioles. And the cell body in this shape is here, here, and here. These three shapes of neurons, these are general shapes. This is unipolar, bipolar, and multipolar. The neurons will typically have a number of dendrites. Those are things that receive signals and send them toward the cell body. And then they have one single axon leaving the cell body that may branch later on, but a single axon leaves the cell body. Sometimes on a microscope slide, it is difficult to tell what is an axon and what are dendrites coming into it, especially for multipolar neurons. So you won't be expected to sort those out. Neuroglia is a wide variety of cells. They look a lot different and they have a lot of different functions, but in general, neuroglia are the cells that don't send electric signals in nervous tissue, but they support the neurons. They either move them to the places they need to go, provide growth factors, move blood vessels around in the brain to help nourish the neurons. They might insulate them. So they're sending electric signals, and just like how wires need to be insulated to properly carry electric signals, neurons also have to be insulated with a protein called myelin. When that protein, myelin, is degraded, it results in so many issues with the nervous system. That's actually what causes multiple sclerosis, is when different parts of the nervous system lose their insulation, their myelin coating on the axons of the neurons. Examples of neuroglia would be things like microglia. Those are special immune cells that live only in the central nervous system. There are oligodendrocytes, which are in the central nervous system and reach out and insulate for the neurons in the central nervous system with that myelin protein. There are astrocytes, which can move neurons around or move blood vessels in the central nervous system around. And there are Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system. They provide the insulation to the peripheral nerves. So that's it for our general overview on the 4 tissue types. Not a lot today was presented, and so you may have questions. Know that a lot of your questions, the things that you're curious about for these 2 types of tissues, will be answered when we get to those units, or you can ask them in class to your instructor. Anyway, you'll be looking at some of these in class and identifying just a few general things about them because you only learned a few general things about them here. So I'll see you then, and I'm glad that you made it this far.
Yeah!